This is a demonstration of even wash and wet blending. Anytime you're doing a scale that's step by step, it's even wash. Anytime you're doing a wet and wet, that's a controlled water. Now when you're doing a big scale, you got to use a big brush and you got to feather it in while it's still damp. You slightly dampen the paper, and you can do this with hues or values. You can't work on it too long because you've got a time limit, and you'll figure out, see, this brush does dry brush. That's not a good brush for this kind of thing. It's a good brush though for holding water because it's a big brush, but you want to nuance this both side to side and back and forth. And you know what I'm doing is squeezing my brush kind of hard in between each one to make sure I'm picking up enough pigment and water so it's smooth. And then I'm going to slightly nuance this ever so very delicately, touching the surface, because I don't want to lift anything up. I want it to smooth in. Very feathery, and it depends on the brush. You got to practice the brush. And then on this end I'm going to go a little darker so that I can have the full range. Full range doesn't mean black, it just means a very dark version of it. And then keep wiping. So this is considered wet and wet. It's tricky. And if you're doing a smaller one, you use a smaller brush. Sometimes the blend is good, but they're too close together, too much on one side. Other times the blend is off, but the values are right. So you'll need to do lots of these. Some to paper, color to color. In intermediate, you'll have to do one like this, 2x10. In beginning, you'll do some smaller ones on your first project. But these are really important because you'll have a lot of softly blended things in any watercolor that you do. So that's that one. Now, I think I'll do the next one in a different video because this is going to be part of the technique. This is called wet and wet blending. And just remember that when you do this, you need always to have a tester sheet to see what values is on your brush and on your palette. And the best way to do this is to have two flat brushes go on either end so that you can pull the dry into the hue. And the whole thing's very slightly dampened at the beginning. Not a lot of water, but just like, it's trial and error. You'll have to do several. If you have a big area like this, which would be for the first project for intermediate, you want to use a brush like this. You want to use the brush that matches the width of it. So these brushes, you might only have one, so you have to go back and forth a little bit. For this one, you should have two. And when you're doing two hues together, it's the same thing. Or if you're doing like red into black or something like that, you would wet a strip. And you'd have your hue on one side and your other hue or value on the other side. And then you have to make them mix together. So you have to travel like this together until they mix in the middle. And it's the same thing. You got to make sure it's not too damp, and you got to make sure they actually overlap in the middle. So you kind of have to pull one into the other one without getting them mixed up on each other's side. So it's definitely a delicate situation. And then you'd want to put a little more pigment on this side and a little more pigment on that side so that it's more of a range. So several versions of those. You can never do too many. You can see I got much too watery here. So you squeeze your brush, pull it together, and then squeeze the other brush, pull it together. Some of these are going to come out perfect, and a lot of them won't. So please do several and be really, really perfectionistic about it and know that if it doesn't work in a couple minutes, it's not going to work. So try not to go back and back and back over something, then you have a problem. Luckily, because of the damp, you have a little more time, but not a lot.